Welcome, everybody. If you could find a seat, we're going to get started. Thank you for staying. I'm Eileen Robinson, and I am I'm a trustee with the First Plymouth Fund, and I'm here to welcome you to a discussion. We're here to share some important information. All that information has been published in various forms, so you should have access to it. We're going to reiterate and hit some highlights and open it up for questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you. So we're going to start with a few comments. So we are bringing you this information from a combination of groups: the First Plymouth Foundation, the First Plymouth Fund. So we have a board of directors for the foundation and a set of trustees for the fund. And then we have your council and First Plymouth staff all putting in to make all of this happen. So I am going to begin by have Jenny get us started.
Oh, perfect. Good morning again. Just because I didn't preach the sermon, you thought you were going to be free of the pastor today. Sermon's got to preach. No, I'm not going to be preaching to you. I'm here this morning to applaud the foresight and commitments of our church leadership. I'm going to say that again. I am here to applaud and lift up to you the amazing leaders that we have serving as lay people across the board at First Plymouth, both from the finance team and from each of the financial arms representing the interests of First Plymouth and our investments. Denise Brown, who's here with us this morning as head of the foundation, and Harry Adair of the endowment committee, and each of the members who have faithfully served on these teams and on some kind of finance team for First Plymouth for many years. If that's you, would you please wave your hand? If you've served on any of these teams, or if you even are related to someone who has, wave your hand. See, the hands and fingers and toes kind of go up, right? This team of committed members has created what I think is a long-term solution to some of the financial challenges facing us in the short term. And there are many. When the foundation was founded over 40 years ago, its mission was to serve the wider mission of First Plymouth Congregational Church, to serve our wider mission. Mission is one of those words that gets thrown around in the life of the church. It could mean our children's ministry, or it could mean funds going out to the mustard seed to support Second Chance Center. And that is all kind of part of our mission. What we like to call our operating budget supports our mission each and every year, our mission to our community, to thrive, to provide education, to work together to do social justice in the community, to have excellent worship and music. All of these are First Plymouth's mission. The development of the First Plymouth Fund, a merger of the foundation and the church's endowed funds, will serve as a beacon of hope for future generations to come, representing the strong, very strong legacy of our past and our expectant and hopeful future. Donor-restricted funds will maintain our commitments in the community, of which there are many that go back many, many, many years, and will stabilize our own operating budget and mission to allow us to support those who come through our doors. So the First Plymouth Fund and its creation, and all of our assets under one umbrella, will not only allow our investments to grow financially, but we will be able to make a greater investment in those people who walk through our doors and those for whom so many doors have been closed for far too long. Freeing up resources to enact and expand our mission will allow us to really mean it when we say, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. So in that spirit, again, I give thanks to serve alongside of so many of you who've put your time and energy and expertise into these kind of issues guiding us forward. I was called here, 2 years ago, David? 10? 6 months ago? I lost count. I'm kind of disoriented. But 2 years ago, you called me here and my family here to journey with you, that we might be a transformative community of faith for the 21st century. So I'm going into 3 years, right, Kim? And we are on that journey. We are continuing to transform lives. I know my life has been transformed. You have imprinted on me. I might stay another 20 years or 30. How old am I, if you let me? But our mission is to listen to the Spirit of God that is alive in each one of us, and to respond and to lean into the hard stuff. There are so many challenges, but when we are full to the brim, right? We are a community full to the brim. And we have the direction of our experts and those who know how to lead us financially into the future. We can take care of the mission. And that is what it's about. Loving, serving, and showing up for each other and for the world. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for putting your time and energy into this. And I will sit down after a brief prayer. Let us pray together. Holy God, we do call on you, and we like to say that Spirit is leading the way. That's because I believe and I know, God, that you are leading the way, that Spirit who lives and breathes within each one of us and within our community is calling us to take the next faithful step. Not every step, but God, the next faithful step. God, speak to us even now. Give us insight and allow us to hear with our spirits and our bodies and our minds, and call us to take the next faithful step. Amen. I now invite Carol Westfall to come and share with you. Carol is our church treasurer, and she will share a report that you've probably heard many times, but she is doing diligence and bringing to us important information that will allow us to know more about the First Plymouth Fund. Thank you so much, Carol.
And thank you, Jenny. As your church treasurer, I'm here this morning to provide a recap of the church financial position with respect to our operating budget. As Jenny said, you've heard or seen all of this information before, either from me personally in a congregational meeting or in some all-church emails that have gone out over the past couple of months. My intent right now is simply to bring it top of mind so that we have it in front of us as we embark on today's conversation about the First Plymouth Fund and the foundation. Joel, could you bring up my slide, please? This is a projection of our operating income and expense over the next 5 years. It's based on extensive analyses that Carol Hainsey and Grover Wren have done, and I am indebted to them for the work that stands behind this fairly simple summary representation of where we think we're going in the next 5 years. You'll see that we've assumed 4.5% inflation. Might be too low, might be too high, but it's about the mid-range of what economists are forecasting right now over the next 5 years. You can also see that there's a lot of red ink in our future projections. So as one of my ILF professors used to say, I'd like to unpack this for you a little bit. Before I summarize what you're looking at here, I'd like to remind you that the last year in which we had an operating surplus was the 2017-2018 fiscal year. And the surplus then was a modest $2,275. In every year since then, we have only been able to balance our operating budget with an extraordinary infusion of funds from a variety of sources. In 2019, the funds came from our operating reserve, which now stands at $62,000 and change. In 2020, we used a small part of an unrestricted bequest from a parishioner, which council designated for operating expenses. But most of the balancing funds in the year 2020 came from the federal government's Paycheck Protection Plan. In 2021, we balanced our budget with one-time extraordinary grants from the First Plymouth Endowment and the First Plymouth Foundation. We used another small part of that unrestricted, unallocated bequest, and we used the rest of the Paycheck Protection Plan funds from the previous year. In 2022, we expect another infusion of funds from a federal government program called the Employee Retention Credit, and we'll use, again, part of that unallocated bequest. All right, now, in case all of you have, all of this has made your eyes cross at this point, let me just summarize what I've said so far by simply repeating that we've been able to balance our operating budget since 2018 only with extraordinary infusions of funds which will not continue to be there for us in future years. So looking at this chart, you can see the magnitude of the challenge. Our operating budget, as Jenny reminded us, provides the infrastructure for our mission and our outreach, and we are facing ever-increasing shortfalls in the years ahead in our operating budget. With the establishment of the First Plymouth Fund at the beginning of this year, additional funds amounting to 5% of the unrestricted assets in the former endowment and foundation funds are assumed in this look. That's the additional funds column. They are assumed in this look to be available to be applied to our operating budget. The endowment portion is already included in the First Plymouth Fund as of January 1st of this year. And the inclusion of the foundation portion is the topic of these conversations and will be put to a congregational vote on March 20th. Without these additional funds, as you can see, we would have a cumulative shortfall of about $1,770,000 over the next 5 years in our operating budget. And even with that additional source of income, you'll see that the cumulative shortfall will still amount to over $900,000. That's still a large number, but the good news is that it's only about half of what the shortfall would be without the availability of those additional funds. So this move that we will talk about today and on February 27th, and on which the congregation will vote on March 20th, is therefore a vital step toward closing our future budget gap. There's a lot more to be done, of course, and a group called Faithful Futures is hard at work rethinking every aspect of this budget, all of the sources of income, and all of the ways we spend that money in the operating expenses as we seek to maximize our resources for carrying out our mission. So I hope this brief recap this morning has helped provide a sense of the financial context in which we as First Plymouth currently find ourselves as we continue the conversation about how to move forward in the service of our mission. Thank you. Apparently I missed a cue, which wouldn't be the first time in my life that that has happened. So let me do the best I can to recover and introduce our next speaker, Denise Brown, the president of the foundation. Denise?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to start at the end of the story, which is, Carol mentioned March 20th. We're going to have a meeting of the members of the foundation. And by the bylaws of the foundation, all the members of First Plymouth Congregation are members of the foundation. So it will take a vote of the members of the foundation to accomplish what we're briefing you on today. and that is that the Board of Directors of the First Plymouth Foundation, and by the way, they're all here. Would you all stand up? Jenny, Liz, Steve, Nancy, Joe, Annie, and Paul. We have been through a lot of study and a lot of work over the last couple of years on this proposition, and I've asked them all to be present today because you might have questions for them that I can't answer, or they may come at it from a different point of view. But back to March 20th. The Foundation Board of Directors passed a resolution at the October meeting at the January meeting 2022, recommending to the members of the foundation that the foundation be dissolved and that the assets of the foundation be conveyed to First Plymouth Church, specifically to the newly created First Plymouth Fund. There are a lot of reasons for this, and I want to go into them briefly. But first, just a brief civic lesson about the foundation itself. As Jenny mentioned, it's been in operation for 40 years. It's certainly an important part of our legacy and our traditions. Many people have served on the boards. It's done a lot of good things in its existence. Over the 40 years, $1.6 million in donations have been made to the foundation. But it's important to note that of that 1.6 million, 1.2 million came from 5 donors in the early years. In other words, there was an initial large bolus of funds that went into this endowment, and since then, it's been sort of a downward slide of financial support from members of First Plymouth and members of the community. In fact, in the last 10 years, the average donations have totaled less than $700 a year. Okay, we've made $1.6 million to date in grants, which is wonderful. A lot of that has come to the church. Most of that has gone out into the community in small grants from $1,000 to $5,000. By exception, we've done some larger grants. An example would be Lutheran Family Services. Last year, the foundation gave a grant of $10,000 as a result of advocacy from Ann to support the immigration work of Lutheran Family Services. Because of the good stewardship of the members of the foundation board over the years, the current balance is $3.3 million. Okay, when we started to look at what would the future of the foundation be and should we look at a different structure of the foundation, we went back to why was the foundation originally created. And there's a lot of probably truth that I found in reviewing the minutes of the last 40 years. And there's some urban myths as well. And I think Stephen will, when he gets up, he'll probably address some of those. But I think 3 are important. It's clear from the minutes of the early years that the foundation was created to manage large donations that were expected to come to the church through members and through bequests, and that the church at that time didn't have the financial capability to manage permanent endowments or long-term bequests. So part of the answer of the foundation was to provide a vehicle for the management of those kinds of funds. Secondly, it's popular folklore that it was created to focus on external and community giving. I guess the feeling being that enough of giving from the congregation was not going out into the community. It was kept within the confines of the church. Third was the idea that if the church is going to be the receiver of significant bequests, and those bequests were going to result in a significant fund, then that fund had to be kept separate because over the years there would be too much temptation to dip into those funds to make up gaps in funding of the annual budget of the church. And if that were done, then over time, giving through annual stewardship would also go down because there would be, I guess, a psychological belief that because this fund was there, we as members of the church would need to give less because we could always pull from that fund. And so the feeling was keep it separate, keep it unavailable for the proceeds of the foundation, keep it unavailable for the annual operations of the church. Those were the 3 reasons that I could find in my research. The mission, Jenny mentioned earlier, early on, was stated as to support the broader mission of First Plymouth, Examples included housing, education, scholarships, mission projects, as well as capital improvements to the church. I want to talk about the challenges of the foundation over the last 40 years, and particularly over the last 8 or 10 or so that I think that is more current and situation than we're dealing with today. It's very clear from the early days of the foundation that it lacked direction. It lacked direction from the congregation. It lacked direction in its own business. This was for a couple of reasons. One is, with relatively few dollars going out in grants, the members of the foundation have been reluctant to say, we're going to focus on children, we're going to focus on healthcare, we're going to focus on housing. There simply has not been enough money from the proceeds of the endowment to have a significant focus and a significant impact in the community. But that has led to a lack of identity by the foundation itself in terms of what it's supposed to do. Early on, there were surveys of the congregation saying, we expect these funds, we have these funds, we have an external foundation. Congregation, what would you like to see the foundation do? And the answer was overwhelmingly, we don't know and we don't care. That, I think, from the early days led to sort of an isolation of the foundation outside of the financial life of the church, and also to a certain extent outside of the mission life of the church. The foundation has had kind of an approach avoidance attitude about fundraising and about adding funds to the foundation. The feeling has been that a significant fundraising effort would compete with the endowment, which was established inside the church and later than the foundation. And those two organizations didn't want to compete, so the foundation stepped back. I think there was also a feeling that the fundraising by the foundation would also compete with the annual stewardship fundraising of the church, and the foundation didn't want to do that either. For whatever reason, it has resulted in no active fundraising on the part of the foundation to grow the endowment. For a long time, the endowment avoided grants for operations so that the grants were to be used for model programs, for new programs, and those kinds of things. This resulted really in very little community impact as a result of the foundation grants. Now, if you talk to some of the organizations like Lutheran Family Services, like DICP, like Kentucky Circle, that over the years have received significant funds, they'll tell you that the impact has been important. However, the vast majority of the funds that haven't gone to First Plymouth Church have been used for relatively small programs that probably would have happened anyway, or small programs that were thought of because they knew $5,000 might be available, but they otherwise might not have done that program. And I think there's a lot of frustration on the part of the foundation and the members of the foundation about this relatively small impact in the community. The same groups apply every year because the foundation, available grants from the foundation were relatively small. It didn't make sense to go out into the community and solicit grant applications. So for example, the general fund of the foundation gives us about $50,000 grant opportunity a year. It doesn't make sense to go out and ask for $1 million worth of grants if we're going to spend $50,000. After 40 years, there were enough organizations that knew about the foundation that we reliably knew we would get about $50,000 worth of grants a year. We rarely turned a grant down, and we didn't have to solicit grants, so it became kind of an insider baseball game. There were some organizations that were very good at playing that game. They knew that if they came to the foundation every 2 or 3 years, they could get $1,000 to $10,000 by filling out the form, and that was pretty reliable. But there were a lot of groups who didn't know about the foundation and didn't have access to those small grants, including groups within the church. Because again, I think the foundation was fairly isolated from the mainstream life of the church. The need for support from the foundation to the church has grown over the last 10 years. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but by my calculations, in the first 30 years of the foundation, less than $70,000 went directly to the church. In the last 10 years, over 200,000, and this doesn't include some important grants like the grants for the interns, have gone to the church. So you can see the increasing need for the church to go to the foundation and ask for funds, not only for special programs, not only for youth programs, not only for mission programs, but increasingly to support the operating budget, to fill in gaps at the beginning of the year as a result of the budget process showing gaps, or gaps toward the end of the year when revenues weren't expected. So the foundation has become increasingly a vehicle to support the operating support the operating needs of the church. In the last several years, we realized that rather than filling gaps, that it would really make more sense to plan to use these monies, so that during the budgeting process, we could say there's $50,000 available from the proceeds from the general fund of the foundation, and that should be worked into the church's budget. At the same time, in the finance committee, we had a similar discussion with the endowment funds. And it became very clear that we weren't using these funds strategically, that they were important funds that could be used to support the church, but they needed to be combined, centrally managed, and strategically allocated and budgeted. At that point, the foundation board got into very serious discussions about, should we do that as a foundation board? So should we tell the church every year, you have the proceeds of the foundation general fund to budget? Or should we, in fact, physically combine the funds into a fund within the church? And we came to the latter, in part because the funds that would be left within the foundation in the other two endowments would be so small that it really wouldn't make sense to keep all the activities of the foundation going if the obligation of the general fund proceeds were going to be made to the church. Okay, in conclusion, I want to say a couple of things. One is the foundation never found a focus, and I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. The external grants that the foundation made today look very similar to the grants that Share the Plate is making. So if we look back 40 years, and part of the reason for the creation of the foundation was to get more funds to the external community, in fact, that situation has been flipped. For many years now, we've had the Share the Plate fund, and so we have something that didn't exist 40 years ago. We have an ongoing commitment to funding external organizations. The pandemic issues have accelerated the financial issues within the church, and it has accelerated the acknowledgement within the foundation that the foundation funds are increasingly needed to support the operations of the church. I'd also like to say that the common wisdom within the foundation, and I think within the finance committee, is rather than segregating these funds and viewing them as not accessible to the church so that people won't reduce their annual commitments, I would like to believe that if we combine these funds to a $5 million plus endowment within the church, that it will be more transparent. People will understand better how the church is funded. They will understand that there is a single point of opportunity for their own planned giving and their own bequests, and they will understand that there is no magic way to fill gaps except for increased stewardship and increased commitments by all the members of the church. And I think by treating everyone as adults, that's likely to be more successful, both in terms of long-term fundraising and in terms of results of annual stewardship. I want to make a couple things clear, and Jenny mentioned this, and that is we've had a lot of generous donors give money to the foundation. What we're recommending will not change any of the intent of the original donors of the foundation, either the original donors or current donors. Donors who gave to the unrestricted fund or the general fund of the foundation trusted that over time, the board members of the foundation, in concert with the church, would do the best for the proceeds with those funds. Where the donors have restricted how the funds can be used, the church will have to live up to those obligations as well. So those obligations will transfer to the church. So although we're looking at a structural change for the foundation, we're not looking for a change in obligation to those who came before us and entrusted us with their important resources. And I'd like to end on a personal note, and that is, it's hard. It's hard when you think about changing something that has existed for so long and has traditionally been part of our community. But it became very clear to me 2 years ago that change needed to happen and that it was the right thing to do. And I have worked very hard in these last 2 years to be a part of the discussions and bring the foundation discussions into the church to result in the election that we'll have on March 20th. And I just want you all to know this hasn't been done lightly. It hasn't been done without a lot of thought and discernment, and it hasn't been done without a lot of mixed feelings about changing a major traditional arm of the church. But it's important and it's the right thing to do, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, for that very thorough history of the foundation. Oh, sorry. So now we're going to invite our last speaker up, Steve Haskins, he serves as the vice moderator and also has been a longtime member of the church and a past treasurer. So he's going to share his perspective, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Eileen. We used to have the church archivist come to council meetings and give archive reports, and it's always sort of not so great when you see your picture in the archive pictures. So that's kind of how I feel today. So I am I think I'm the living First Plymouth Foundation archivist. I got when I came back from Nebraska in 1982, I got a phone call in 1983 that said, we started the First Plymouth Foundation last year and we need someone to do the accounting. So I said, okay, that sounds okay. I was, young. And so I've been doing the accounting since 1983 for the First Plymouth Foundation. I attended all the board meetings. So that's about 150 board meetings. And so I think I have sort of a personal feeling about the foundation because I've been to all those meetings and I knew them. I knew the major donors personally, not real personally, but I knew who they were and they talked to me and everything. And so I had a sort of personal feel about the foundation, not because I, made major donations to it, but I do feel like I was part of it for, 38 years. So, and I'm only 45 now, so that's, it's pretty cool to be doing accounting when you're 7 years old. Anyway, so when I first heard about the idea, I was kind of reluctant. Do we really want to do this? And what I found out was my feelings were personal, not necessarily business. I think what I was feeling was fear of this great foundation being used up by the church or something bad happening or something irrational. And so I had to work that out in my head and go back 38 years and think about everything and think about these people who gave a lot of their resources and how would they feel about it, which really isn't the point. And as Denise said, these people gave these funds, knowing that the foundation would do the right thing, knowing that our church would do the right thing. And it's just kind of a personal thing. One thing I just want to point out, because I can't not do a numbers thing here. I'm an accountant, It's so cool that the foundation got $1.6 million of contributions, and they paid out $1.6 million of grants, and there's still $3.3 million in the foundation. That's the value of time, investments, that kind of thing. So I think that's a very cool thing. So I guess, and I guess I'm also not. My fear has been abated that the foundation general unrestricted funds will be treated as an endowment by the church. They will not be open for, whatever use. They're going to be an endowed fund, and that's one of the requirements that the foundation put into their resolution to dissolve. And it will be followed, assuming and when the congregation votes to dissolve the foundation and put the funds in. The other thing is there are a couple of restricted funds in the foundation that will stay restricted to the donor's wishes. And that's really cool, but it's not really cool. It's required by law, but still really cool. So I guess I'm the one here to say I've seen the light. And I think this is a good idea, and I think it's a necessary idea for all the reasons Denise and Carol have said. I'm not here to give you a lot of numbers because you've heard a lot of numbers. I really want to give you a lot of numbers because I've been doing them for 38 years, but I won't. I'm just going to say I think this is the way to go. This is what we have to do, because in the end, what we have to do is, First Plymouth is what we have to do. It's the most important thing here, and these people who gave their funds believed in First Plymouth. I believe in First Plymouth, so I think that's what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So now we are open for discussion and comments. So if you would like to make a comment, you can either raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone over, or you can come on up. I can move this somewhere a little more accessible back here, and you can just step forward and speak. So is there anybody who would like to make a comment? Are there any questions? Rita, yeah?
My name's Rita Alexander, and I'm going to be the squeaky wheel. We had a discussion, which Denise attended a couple of months ago, maybe November. And the philosophy of the outreach committee is that we would like to make decisions on that committee being a splash in a little pond versus a little, I didn't say that right. We'd like to be a big splash in a little pond, so we designate small groups to donate to that we think make a difference in the community, versus like giving to American Cancer, where a $2,000 donation to them is like an average donation. I'm not making fun of that, it's just that that's what it is. So Mary Lee Anderson wrote to our committee yesterday, and she was upset after listening to the men's breakfast program. She has some concerns. We had a very heated discussion, the men against the women, and came to a compromise that we have the Hubner Fund, which is we cannot spend below $82,000, and that has been taken over by the group putting the money in that fund. Our concern is that we will have no additional funds to give to special groups that come without a strong mission that we think the church would contribute to for the month. I have been very inspired, and I don't think it's really been reported, that we have enough money to support an Afghan fund. We have over $10,000 that has been donated in the last 6 weeks for that goal of having $10,000, and that continues to grow. We have activity in the church with furniture being donated. We're working with the Salvation Army besides Lutheran Family Services. I've worked with them a lot in the last few weeks. And also when we had the Boulder Community Fund, after the Marshall fires, we raised an extraordinary amount of money for that. I believe that when we have stewardship campaigns, we are not focusing on the correct things, that if you give specific amounts for different projects in the church, people can see what their money is actually going to. For the screen up there, that doesn't tell me anything. I saw that salaries were going up over $200,000 in the next 5 years. Why? I mean, I understand that people want to make more, but that is way ahead of inflation. So I feel like the outreach committee has, I was a little insulted in the report this morning because I felt like we have done the work that should have been done by the foundation, that committee has not been vigilant in coming together, coalescing, and being the leaders of the church that they should have been. And our outreach committee has taken that over and become more of a solid leader with the small funds that we have. Also, if the stock market tanks, we're all in a lot of trouble. So I just feel like I need to speak out for the outreach committee because we work really hard to delve into what is really needed. We turn people down, and I just feel like maybe the foundation didn't do that. They didn't do their job of vetting things correctly. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Carol's going to respond.
I'd like to first clarify that the funds which came over to the First Plymouth Fund from the First Plymouth Endowment are being treated in the same way that the funds which come from the foundation are expected to be treated. If the donor did not put any restrictions on their donation, but trusted the church to use it in the best way possible, those unrestricted funds, the earnings on those unrestricted funds, we expect that 5% of them will be made available to the church operating budget. But there are restricted funds in the endowment as well. One is the brand fund, which is designated for church facilities, equipment, administrative costs. That will continue to be restricted as the original donors specified, and it will be used only for facilities, equipment, and church administrative needs. There's another fund, which you mentioned, called the Huebner Fund. The Huebner Fund is legally unrestricted. The original donor did not put a restriction on it. However, the council, when the donation came to the church, the council decided to essentially restrict it for outreach purposes and gave the administration of the Huebner Fund to the outreach CAM. That will not change. Even though the funds themselves are technically unrestricted, we are going to continue to consider them as if they were restricted and follow the same procedures that outreach has been following for a number of years. Any amount of money over the $82,000 base will be available for the outreach committee to continue to allocate. And as of Wednesday, the Huebner Fund had $91,193 in it. So there's almost $10,000 available right now for the outreach CAM. The other thing I'd like to just comment quickly on, I didn't want to put a lot of detail up here. I can spend, like Steve, I'm a numbers person. I can spend hours on numbers, but that's not what we're here about today. So I'd like to refer you to the 2021 annual report, which has multitudes of detail about every department, every line item in the budget, and we'll give you all kinds of information about where those numbers come from. But one of our biggest challenges is that older donors who have made larger pledges to the church over the last decade, 2 decades, folks, we're losing them. We are losing them. And we are not replacing them fast enough for the pledges to be there that we have had over the past years. So one of the reasons for all of this red ink on our future projections is pledges, reduced pledges, the reduced revenues from reduced pledges. So I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Yeah, just to clarify, and I apologize if this didn't come through earlier, of the 1.6 million that the foundation has made in grants over the 40 years, about 300,000 of that has come directly to First Plymouth, most of it not for operations, most of it for children's programs, for immigration task force, for a variety of, for music, for choir robes, for all kinds of things. But I guess what I didn't say is that about 1.3 million has gone out into the community to community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations operating in Colorado in the amounts of $1,000 to $5,000 in terms of grants. So the impact of the foundation in terms of small grants in the community has been significant. No way has the foundation made more of a commitment to the church than it made to the external community, and I want to make that clear. Thank you.
Rita, did that answer your questions? Oh, Jack, go ahead.
And a good day to everybody, especially all the people who have worked so hard to keep us in good operating order. My name is Jack. I've been a member of this church since 1979, and I've seen quite a lot, and most of which I remember. But I do remember there were days in this church when the biggest problem was trying to figure out how to accommodate the cars that had come for two different services. And I'm looking around today, and that's just not a problem these days. I will confess to having gaps in my understanding of all of this, and I'm sure there are people here who can help me satisfy the gaps. First of all, I am concerned that for at least 4 years, there has been difficulty making both ends of the budget meet. And this occurs to me like kind of the way we do things at our house. You know, we dearly love to have prime rib every night, but we don't have enough money to have prime rib every night. So every so often we have, in fact, most of the time we have hamburgers or meatloaf. And fortunately, I like hamburgers and meatloaf, but I have a hard time trying to figure out how we can long endure as an organization spending more money than we can expect to bring in. I just don't understand this. Also, I understand the foundation has been in business for 40 years. Is that correct? All right, and it has a number of different functions, and it has $3.3 million in assets, which is tremendous, and it takes a lot of effort to invest that properly, wisely, and it also takes a lot of effort to spend it wisely and in accordance with the people who had given money to support it. Now, I am unaware of when the fund came into existence. I don't remember that, but like I say, I'm quite old and I do not remember quite so good anymore. But if it's in existence, somebody would tell me just by a nod, it's in existence. Well, was it in existence for 4 years, 5 years? How long is it? The first the fund. How long has the fund been in existence?
Since January 1st.
So it's brand new. Okay, and does it have assets in it right now? Okay. Is there a document that creates that? Okay. How could a person like me get a copy of what that looks like? Is there a way to do that? If if I sent an email to you, Eileen, could you help me?
Yeah, so Liz Massatelli is the church moderator, and so the council is the one who officially enacted that fund.
Okay, so it was a vote of the council, not by the church. Is that correct? Not by the congregation, is what I meant to say. Okay, so it's in existence. It has rules and powers and authority and a governing body. Okay.
So the
now-
fund has a group of trustees so that manage it. So as part of creating the fund, exactly what you said, there's infrastructure, there's guidelines, there's a body of people managing it.
Okay, so, but it does have a governing body. Those are the
Yes.
trustees, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you're vice chair,
Yes.
a big shot. Okay, now this is starting to come into some focus. Okay, now the question I have, and that is, it's called the fund. It's a catchy name, and I understand why well, no, I'm not even sure. If I had to explain it to somebody else, I couldn't do it. How that is going to move the ball forward. And I'm talking about sustaining the church as a going concern. I just can't see this moving forward. I can see a close encounter of the not so pleasant type. And maybe this sounds harsh, and I will take your word, but this doesn't make sense to me. And we could call this the King Midas Fund. And how does this help us continue our mission? And I guess our mission, I would call it advancing the Word of God forever. And I just need to be educated. So, and if we need a change to the foundation, why not amend the authority or expand it or whatever, the foundation, rather than create something brand new? I knew I was going to get an explanation.
Okay.
All right, have at it.
Okay, the economic forecast issues of the church will not be solved by what we're talking about today. But what it does do is it takes $5 million within the financial enterprise of the church, consolidates them, invests them, and points them in a single strategic direction to support the church. Right now, we have $5 million annually, and let's say we have 5% of that, what, about $250,000 a year, that goes out in little streams and little bullets across the community, across special projects of the church, none of which, or very little of which, goes into the very real expenses of us as a congregation. So what we've decided is to take this whole financial enterprise, and that's what Jenny talked about earlier, and saying, how do we best deploy those funds for the life of the church? And the way we best deploy them is to address not only mission expenses of the church, but also fixed expenses of the church. I remember when I was moderator, 80 years ago, we had a unanimous vote of the congregation to stay in this building. And that vote had consequences. The consequences included the need for a capital campaign, which we had, and we improved the building. But part of the consequence of that is an ongoing consequence of the expenses of living in this building. When I talked about the horrendous impact of the pandemic, part of that was we didn't have outside groups coming in to use the church. When we did the renovations of this church, it was with the idea that it would become even a more attractive community asset. And as a more attractive community asset, it would be used by more people in the community. Well, in the last 2 years, we've had basically no one from the outside using the church, but we have this fixed expense of keeping the church up. So we're not talking about prime rib versus hamburger. We're talking about a home versus no home. And we already made the vote that this was going to be our home. And if we do that, we have to cover the expense of our home. Now, where's the gap going to be made up of? I'm not on stewardship this year, but I have about 10 years experience on stewardship. It's going to have to come from us. And I think that's part of what we're talking about today, is we're talking about an incremental approach to getting the financial life of the church whole. The first increment of that is to scoop up all of the unrestricted funds and be more strategic about pointing them to the direct support of the church. That's what the March 20th vote is going to be about. The next step is going to be about how do we, as a congregation, live up to decisions we've already made and obligations we already have that are reflected in this budget.
And I did also just want to add on top of that is the budget process is well defined, it's a reliable process, and it's how we as a body decide how to use our resources. And what happens is when there are so many things happening outside of the budget process, we're doing things in a very ad hoc manner. And so we're, like Denise said, we're trying to consolidate all of our resources. We're trying to streamline the process and also be thoughtful in taking the big picture into account instead of having all these separate buckets and all these different people evaluating based on different criteria. So this is just a step. And that's why the title of some of the material coming out is just called The Next Step. This is not a solution, but we are in a fairly dire situation, and you're right, Jack, this doesn't solve it, but it moves us in a direction. And there's other people working on kind of meeting in the middle. So they're working on the other end, trying to meet in the middle. And so this is where we are in terms of trying to be good stewards of the resources we have, which is what we have today. And $5+ million is a lot of resources, but it's not quite enough. Now there's gonna be a core, and I'm not an accountant, so the numbers aren't my thing, but Carol has referred to it as a corpus. There's a core amount of money that we cannot spend, and it will be preserved. And then what we're talking about is taking money beyond that. So for the Hebner Fund, the 82 is that corpus, and we can't spend that. We can take what comes beyond that in surplus. So that will be true for the bulk of this money that we're talking about. We're not gonna spend it down to zero no matter what the stock market does, but that will affect the surplus, and the 5% we're kind of counting on will vary just based on what's happening in the bigger world. So I just wanted to make those couple comments. Does anybody else want to respond to any of that?
We have a visitor
please,
who would like to
please.
share.
Yeah, please come on up. And
I'm Leah Kabira, and I'm going to be a member as soon as possible. So I'll just, preface it.
Thank
I
God.
consider this to be my community. I totally geek out on numbers. And one thing I'd like to offer as a reframe for operating expenses is that it's not overhead, it's a tool. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but as you mentioned, the building is a tool. The building is a tool for outreach. The building is a tool for being a good part of our community. The building is a tool for educating children. And if we think of our expenses in that way, then it becomes an investment. If we look at the pastor's time, well, how much time do they spend working with children? How much time do they spend in the community? How much time do they spend counseling poor souls who come in and just need a talk? How much impact does that have? So I just want to offer that reframe of operating expenses as it's not a sunk cost. It's an investment in impact. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Doug Brown, and I'm here to promote the Men's Fellowship Breakfast, which was yesterday, which we don't have a breakfast anymore because we're online. But yesterday, Grover Wren gave a presentation for about 25 or 30 people that was very, very complete. Does enable a big picture view of what's going on. And I don't know, the folks that are doing the education of the congregation, is there any plan to have Grover give that presentation to the whole group? Just a question, because I think it addressed a lot of those things. So.
Well, I'd just like to say that we recorded Grover's presentation, and it's going to be edited and available online, probably under the aegis of the Men's Fellowship, but you can find it at the church website probably at the end of the week.
Thank you, Bruce.
You can mute that. I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. So, thank you so much for the comments and the questions. I wanted to invite all of you who are currently serving in any capacity right now in reimagining who we are today and who we will be tomorrow. If you're a part of the Faithful Futures team, if you're a part of the council, if you're a part of the finance team, if you're a part of one of the arms of the endowment committee or the First Plymouth Foundation, will you please stand up? Or if you're a trustee with the First Plymouth Fund, if you're a part of outreach and you're here today, would you please stand? So look around this room and know that there are at least 10 other people for every one, probably, who are currently discerning, working, studying, researching, and actively participating in continuing our missional footprint in the congregation and discerning what ours will be today and tomorrow. So we don't have, I think this is a really good important point to make. And Jack, I love your analogy. We don't have the luxury of prime rib. Let me just say that. We don't and haven't for quite some time had the luxury of prime rib. I actually have the luxury of discerning how to make the meat go far enough in the sloppy joe for my staff so that they can continue showing up during a pandemic for 2 years, showing up, loving children, loving youth, and creatively coming up with solutions so that we as a church can still feel whole when we come together, whether it's in person and online, and that we can grasp the hope that we know, right? The hope that we know because we know hope. First Plymouth's legacy and our future is one of hope. But we are not biting off prime rib. We are making the sloppy joes go pretty far, and thankfully my kids like sloppy joes, Jack, right? I think what I want each of us to hear is that so many people care. It's what Steve said. We have to care about First Plymouth. So many of us care about First Plymouth. That's right, Janet. We all care about First Plymouth. Berkeley Rich cared about First Plymouth each and every day, showing up left and right. So many of our saints who I stood on the earth and put them into the ground in the last year and a half, 2 years, so many of them care and cared about First Plymouth. We're not going anywhere. Have we not learned that the church is not this beautiful building in the last couple of years? Clap your hands if you've learned that the church is not the building in the last 2 years, right? Do we love this building? I think it's pretty nice. I think when I saw the pictures when I was interviewing and thinking about responding to these crazy people who were calling me to Colorado for my beautiful Durham, North Carolina mountains, I was like, wow. These people have built something beautiful and magical. Is it still beautiful and magical? Yes, it is. Is it about what I'm seeing here? No. I stood in this room for a long time without any of you in here. Did this room make me feel hope or spirit or connected to God? Maybe it got me a little closer. But you know what it was? It was you. I could look at that little white camera right there every week and know that you are on the other side and that God binds us together, not just today, but for the next 6 months that I knew would also be staring at the camera. Friends, we care about First Plymouth. We have all the resources that we need, both financial and with our bodies, in our spirits. We are going to continue showing up in the community. We are going to continue to go to Ready to Work and sit there with young girls this week. This young girl sat there, and Kent and I were there with Steve Barber, and she's asking, we're talking about First Plymouth, and she's just trying not to be homeless and trying to find a way, and she's like, what if my walk with Christ, what if it's not where it should be? Would I still be invited to your church? Can I still come? Is there a place for me there? Friends, we don't have to look very far to know what it is that we're fighting for. These numbers, they're nicer than I am, right? They're more polite and they're more put together than I am. I'm just gonna be frank. I really don't want to go back to my office after this meeting and the next meeting and decide, whoa, it's already a shoestring. I wonder what other meat I can serve. Maybe we should all be vegetarian. We should all be vegetarian. I told Eric a minute ago, you're lucky you're vegetarian because you're gonna hang on for a while. But friends, we have the resources. People before us invested. We're going to continue to invest. It makes great sense, if nothing else, right, to put our assets together under the umbrella of the church. We are the church. Greater return and greater investment in those who come through the doors. It is about money. I'm not going to be the pastor who stands here and says it's not about money. It is completely about money. But it is not only about money. It is what we choose to do with the money that we have that they then can expand and continue the resources that are mission-oriented, right? We can do this really easy thing, which I think most of us have been talking about this and working on this for so long. It feels like an easy thing. It's the low-hanging fruit. This decision is the low-hanging fruit. And then what comes next is how we imagine and creatively envision how we're going to take the next faithful step, which is why so many of you are working to discern what that next faithful step is. I just want you to know that these decisions aren't made lightly, and they're made by you. I mean, most of you sitting out here have been working on this for many, many years, or many, many months. Feels like years. But know that you're in good hands, and I feel like I'm in good hands because I'm in your hands. I'm going to continue to call our staff to take the next faithful step, to make the sloppy joes, last a little bit longer. But I know that even this season, while we're coming into Lent, it's been a desert wandering wilderness. But if we imagine ourselves full to the brim, it's because that we are. We are full to the brim when we utilize the resources at our fingertips to bring about mission and wholeness and connectivity with our community and with one another. So thank you for being here. I just wanted to make sure that as your pastor, I am in this with you, and that we are working together each and every day right now to imagine a creative future for our congregation, and I wholeheartedly know and believe that it is a robust one. If you have any questions for me, I would love to respond if I can. Any comments? Any comments from our Faithful Futures co-chairs? Words of wisdom? I'm looking at David and Deborah and Carol. I know David has a word. The pastor in him is coming out.
I think the faith journey is fun. I truly do. And I am so excited to be teamed up with Carol Westfall and with Deborah Arca as co-chairs of the Faithful Futures group. And as I'm listening and kind of assimilating all this wonderful conversation that's going on, and I'm absolutely in awe of the work that's been done by the group of people that are before us today, sharing some of this news. This is all done in a spirit of love and compassion, not just for what we believe theologically, religiously, but for this community. And I really appreciate that a great deal, and would salute all of you that have brought this to us. As a Faithful Futures group, and I hope you'll continue to read the newsletter insertions that are going on over the next months as we continue to meet, that will keep you up on our progress as a Faithful Futures group, that are saying, what do we contemplate as we go into this future? Some of it of which we know, and a good part of it of which we don't know. And how do we build some excitement around the idea that we may want to change it all up? We think there's some opportunity out there for us to at least take a look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And at least leave ourselves open for possibility. And so that's Faithful Futures. But as I was listening today, I thought, gosh, I wish we were as far along in our discernment process as the groups that are coming before us this morning, and wishing we were that far along. We're not there yet. And so before we get out there with something that we can say, look, this is a possibility for the future beyond all of this. Let's keep the journey going, and let's hope it does end up in the promised land somewhere. I think it's fun, and it may be right here, and it may not be right here. We don't know that, but that's a decision we're going to make as a congregation, and I'm looking forward to that. So, thank you.
Eileen, do you have words to close it?
So thank you so much for being here today. And I just want to remind you, we're going to have another conversation in 2 weeks. So please reach out if you have questions, or you maybe are more comfortable having a one-on-one conversation. The contact emails for the board of directors of the foundation and the trustees of the fund are all in the letter that was sent out. And so there's a reference in the weekly email. So please reach out to us, and we hope to see you again in 2 weeks for another conversation. And then most importantly, show up on March 20th for the vote. That will be a formal vote, and we need as much participation in that as possible. So thank you.
Just remember to be nice to our visitors who joined us for this really lovely meeting. Thank you, Carol and Leah. Thank you for being with us. Shake their hands and say hello to them. I'm going to call them out. They're in the back row. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.